Hey guys, it's Tim King, and I'm teaching class today. And what I want to talk about is the fire hazards of oxygen. Oxygen is something you have to live. In fact, there were no fires on the planet Earth until oxygen concentrations got to a certain percentage. There were periods of time where the oxygen was so low on Earth that fire didn't even exist. It's exactly the same percentage as it is when you do mouth-to-mouth breathing. When you blow into somebody and give them the breath from you, the remaining amount of oxygen left over is just enough to keep a fire. And so remember that the most effective mouth-to-mouth breathing of all is probably not going to sustain a person's life very well. Nothing is going to be better than doing it with oxygen. But anyway, my experiment is this. Basically, I'm going to switch this and show you. I took an oxygen tank and I filled a mug of oxygen up. Now this mug right here is empty, but this mug right here actually contains oxygen in it. I collected from this tank. I have a lighter, and I have already played this experiment once to make sure it works, which I knew it would. But what I want you guys to see is that I have got a piece of paper on here to help slow down the oxygen from mixing in the air. It mixes really slowly because oxygen is actually a little bit heavier than air. So I'm going to start this off and catch this piece of wood on fire. And I'm going to let it get burning good. So it's going to be good and hot. And you can see that it's really hot. And okay, now you can see that it's out, right? Watch what happens when I put it in the jar. And there it went. You heard a pop. And we'll do it again. And it did it again. A minjigaboo-laroo, a zippity-boppity-boo. And it burst into flames again. It's nothing magic. It's just that when you have the three things together that can make a fire: energy, fuel, and oxygen together, you have what is needed to make a fire. Fire is a chemical reaction that occurs when the energy source is enough to ignite the fuel in the presence of oxygen, and the chemical reaction occurs. The higher the concentration of any of these three items, the easier it is to make the fire happen. The presence of oxygen, the higher the concentration, the more deadly it is. And so oxygen is actually heavier than air. And what I would have liked to have done is fill this other jar up. And I think that's what I'm going to do, is I'm going to take and fill this jar up, and I'm going to try another version of this experiment. Make sure the jar is good and full. Okay. So the tank is good and full of oxygen. Cut the oxygen off. All right, so now what I'm going to try is a different experiment. Okay. This time I'm going to light the piece of stick again, and I'm going to try to prove that I can actually pour the oxygen across. So again, light it really good. So it's burning real good. Everybody see that? Okay, so now let's see what happens when I tip the jar over and look at air. Oxygen is indeed heavier than air. That all the oxygen poured out of the jar when I tipped it over, and it still caught this on fire. So just remember, in the presence of oxygen, it doesn't take as much energy to light the fuel. So that's why oxygen is indeed a fire hazard.